After my grandfather died, I inherited his $18 M mountain estate. My parents demanded the deed, saying, "You're not man enough to keep it." I refused. The next morning, my brother arrived with private security to throw me out, then froze when he saw who was already standing on my porch. My name is Holden Whitaker. I am 38 years old. 11 years on the books at the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, and most of my work is elk. We brought elk back to the Central Appalachians starting in 2012, and I have spent most of my career figuring out where they go and why. I live in a cedar-sided rental in Elkins, West Virginia, drive a 2015 F-150 with a department decal on the door, and own one suit I have worn twice. I am not married. I have a German Shepherd named Bailey who comes to work with me most days. I make $61,000 a year before taxes. I am also, as of 14 days before that morning on the porch, the sole owner of 2,840 acres of Allegheny mountain land in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, with a stone lodge and a caretaker's cabin and a private pond and a fire tower my grandfather built by hand in 1979. The land was appraised at $18 million. I had not slept much in 14 days, not because of the $18 million, because of what was coming up the switchback to take it from me. I should tell you about my grandfather because nothing on this porch makes sense without him. Stanley Whitaker bought the first 300 acres of this mountain in 1962 for $14 an acre. He bought it with money he had been saving since he came back from Korea. He added to it over 42 years, parcel by parcel, the way some men add to a baseball card collection. He never borrowed against it. He never sold an inch. He worked construction in the off-season and built the lodge himself between 1968 and 1971, with my grandmother handing him boards. The fire tower came later. He built it after my grandmother died because he said the highest point on the property was a good place to sit with her. He was a quiet man. He read books. He kept a list in the front of every book of every other book he had ever read, going back to 1956. The list was 41 pages long. I spent every summer of my childhood with him on the mountain. Beckett did not. Beckett got the family business. Our father owned a hardware store in Lewisburg from 1976 to 2011, and Beckett was the one who got handed the keys at 26 on the assumption he would grow it. He sold it to a regional chain at 30 for less than my father had paid to start it, and our parents told everyone at church that the offer had been too good to turn down. Beckett got the first wedding our parents paid for, in 2008, in Charleston. He got the second wedding our parents paid for, in 2017, in Asheville. He got the line of credit for his first development company in 2013, and a line of credit for his second in 2019, and a cosign note when the second one folded in 2022. I got the mountain summers. The deal was never said out loud. It did not need to be. By the time I was 12, I understood the arrangement, and I would not have traded it. The clearest reminder of how the arrangement worked happened the summer I was 16. My grandfather had taken me to a fly fishing weekend on the Greenbrier, and I came home to Lewisburg on a Sunday night to find my parents had moved my room. They had given my room to Beckett because Beckett's first apartment had fallen through, and he was moving back home for a while. My new room was the small office at the back of the house with no window. My mother walked me to the doorway and said, "You spend most of your time on the mountain anyway, honey." I put my duffel bag on the desk and called my grandfather. He drove down the next morning and helped me load my bed and my desk into his Bronco, and we took them up the mountain. I had a real room at the lodge from that day until I left for college. It had a window that looked east. My mother never mentioned it again. The clearest thing I remember from being 12 happened in October of 1998. My grandfather drove down to Lewisburg on a Tuesday and took me out of school at lunch, and we drove back up the mountain in his Bronco. He did not say where we were going. He had a manila folder on the dash and a thermos of coffee between the seats. We parked at the four corners of the property at 4 different points across 2 days, and at each corner he handed me a small brass pin. 7 inches long, the cap stamped 1998, and he made me press it into the ground with the flat of my hand. Each pin had a little notch on the top. The notches lined up with each other across the whole property if you knew where to look. The 4th pin he kept. He drove it into the ground at the corner himself. We drove back to the lodge that night, and he set a 5th pin on the kitchen table between us. The spare. He looked at me across the table the way he looked at everything, which was carefully. "Holden," he said, "this is what we did. Do not let them undo it." I asked him what we had done. He said, "We promised the land it could stay the way it is." He put the spare pin in a small wooden box with a hinged lid that had been his father's. He set the box on the mantel above the fireplace. He never told my brother about the box. He never told my parents. I forgot about the box for about 15 years. Then I remembered. By that time I was already a wildlife biologist, and I had read enough conservation easements to know what my grandfather had probably signed in 1998, and what those 4 pins probably marked, and why he had wanted a 12-year-old to remember pressing them into the ground. That was the day, looking back on it, that he had picked his heir. The will reading was 4 days after the funeral. My parents drove up from Lewisburg. Beckett drove down from Charleston. We met at the office of the lawyer my grandfather had used since 1981, on the 2nd floor of a brick building on Court Street in Marlinton. The lawyer was an older man named Wallace Pickett, no relation, and he opened a manila folder that looked exactly like the one that had ridden on the dash of the Bronco in 1998. He read it short. The lodge and the 2,840 acres went to me. Sole and clear. Subject to existing encumbrances of record. That phrase, subject to existing encumbrances of record, was the only part anyone in the room except me and Pickett noticed at the time. My parents did not catch it. Beckett did not catch it. Beckett laughed. He actually laughed out loud in the conference room 3 days after his grandfather's funeral. He looked at my mother and said, "Mom, tell me this is a joke." My mother said, "There has been a mistake." My father did not say anything. He was sitting in the 2nd chair from the door. He looked at the wall. Pickett looked at my mother over his glasses and said the will was filed in probate in August and had been on his desk since June. There was no mistake. There was a copy for each of us. He slid an envelope to each of us across the table. He did not slide one to my father. My father had asked, before any of us arrived, to read the will in advance. I learned about that part later. Beckett left first. He did not take his envelope. My mother stood up and adjusted her purse strap and said, "Holden, we will need to have a family conversation about this." I told her I was free Saturday. I drove back up the mountain alone. I drove the long way. I stopped at the overlook on Route 39, where my grandfather and I had pulled over the day we drove home from the easement signing in 1998 to watch the sun go down over the valley. I sat in the truck for 10 minutes. I did not get out. When I got to the lodge, it was almost dark. I went inside. I did not turn on the lights. I went straight to the mantel. I opened the wooden box. The spare pin was still there. It had the same small weight in my palm it had always had. The 1998 on the cap was the same 1998 it had always been. There was a folded sheet of yellow legal paper underneath the pin that had not been there in 1998. The note was dated July 14th, 3 weeks before my grandfather died, in his handwriting, which was the same handwriting he had used on the list of books inside every book he had ever read. It said, "Holden, they will come for it. Sterling has the rest. Trust her. They will offer you a number. The number means nothing, because the land is not worth that to anyone who would say it. Hold the line until the people who already love it can stand on it with you. They will come quick. Be ready by Wednesday. S.W." It was written 8 days before he had his second stroke. He had known he was running out of time. He had known what was coming. He had known their playbook, because he had watched them run it on smaller things for 50 years. I sat down at the kitchen table with the note and the pen, and I did not move for about an hour. I read the note 4 times. Then I read it a 5th time. The line that got me was the people who already love it, not the people who already love you. He had written it on purpose. He had spent his whole life on the side of the land. He had picked an heir who would do the same. Then I went to bed. The next morning I drove to Lewisburg to meet Dr. Imogen Sterling. Annette called me that night at 9:45. I was driving back up the mountain. I let the call ring through to voicemail. She left a message that started warm and got cold. "Holden, honey," she said. "We need you to understand what is being asked here. Your grandfather was not himself at the end. Your brother has a family. Your brother has obligations. You have a job and a dog. You are not man enough to hold a piece of property of this size by yourself. There is no shame in admitting that. Your father agrees with me." I listened to the voicemail twice in the truck before I deleted it. I called her back from the porch. She answered on the second ring. "Mom," I said. I was 12. He took me to all 4 corners. She did not speak for a long second. Then she said, "Holden, please do not be difficult about this." I hung up. Beckett texted within the hour. "We need to talk in person. Before Saturday. There is a way to do this where nobody gets embarrassed." I did not reply. I sat on the porch with the spare pen in my left hand and the phone in my right, and I thought about the line in the note that said Sterling has the rest. I had met Imogen Sterling at the funeral. She had introduced herself by saying she had owed my grandfather a coffee for 19 years and was sorry it had taken his death for her to admit it. I had liked her immediately. I had not yet understood that he had told her about me before he had told me about her. The Allegheny Highlands Conservation Trust kept its office in a converted bank building 2 blocks off the courthouse square in Lewisburg. Brick. 2 stories. A vault in the back they used as a file room. I was there at 8:30. The receptionist looked at me, looked at her screen, and said Dr. Sterling was expecting me at 9. She offered me coffee. I said I had some in the truck. Imogen Sterling came out of her office at 8:45 carrying a sealed manila envelope with my name on it in my grandfather's handwriting. She did not say hello. She handed me the envelope. Then she said, "He told me you would come on a Thursday. He owed me $20 on that bet." I asked her if I won the $20. She said, "Your grandfather did." He left the 20 in the envelope. I opened the envelope on her conference table. There was a $50 bill, not a 20, clipped to the top of a stack of documents. There was a note paperclip to the 50 that said, "Buy yourself something stupid." The documents were the easement. Filed October 18, 1998, renewed and modernized July 8th of this year. 2,560 of the 2,840 acres encumbered in perpetuity. No development. No subdivision. No collateralization. No timber harvest beyond a small annual cull approved by the trust's forester. The land could be sold, but only to a buyer who accepted the easement, which meant the practical market for it was the trust itself and 1 or 2 private conservation buyers who collected mountains the way other people collected paintings. $18 million was the appraisal as wilderness. As development land, it would have been worth maybe 2.5. There was a second document, the life estate for Otis Riggs in the caretaker's cabin and the surrounding 2 acres, recorded in 2003. Otis was 71 years old. He was not going anywhere. No owner of the property could remove him. There was a third document, a standing right for the trust to be present at any ownership transition and to witness any attempt to remove either the easement or the life estate. I read all 3 twice. I asked Imogen if she had any idea what the actual current market value was to a buyer who had no interest in conservation. She looked at me over the rim of her coffee and said, "About $4 million, maybe less." Most of the development potential died the day your grandfather signed the easement. The rest died the day he signed the life estate. I sat with that for a minute. Then I asked her if she could be at the lodge on Friday morning at 5:30. She said, "Your grandfather already asked me that. The answer is yes." My parents drove up Wednesday evening, unannounced, the way they had driven up everywhere my whole life. They came onto the porch without knocking. My mother sat in the chair my grandfather had sat in for 42 years. My father sat in the chair next to it. He did not look at me. He looked at the mountain. My mother had brought a folder with her. She set it on the small table between the two chairs. "Holden," she said, "your brother has put together a family trust. It is fair. It is generous. You will retain a meaningful interest. You will be on the board. The estate stays in the family name. It stops being a personal embarrassment to your father." I asked her how the estate was a personal embarrassment to my father. She said, "Every man in town knows what your grandfather was worth. Every man in town now knows his money went to the son who counts trees for a living. You have never been man enough for that house. Beckett at least understands what people in this town respect." My father did not contradict her. He did not look at me. He looked at the ridge. The wind moved through the pines on the western face. The sound was the same sound it had been every Wednesday evening of my childhood. There was a hawk working the field below the lodge. There was a freight train 2 valleys over you could hear if you knew how to hear it. I let my mother finish. She said Holden once more, gently, the way she said it when I was 8, and slid the folder an inch closer to me on the table. I said, "I will not be signing that, Mom." She told me I had until Friday morning. I walked them to their car. My father stopped with his hand on the door handle. He looked like he was about to say something. He did not. He got in. They drove down the mountain. I went inside. I closed the door. I made 3 phone calls. The first one was to Otis Riggs, who was sitting at his kitchen table in the caretaker's cabin a quarter-mile down the ridge. I told him what was probably coming and when. He said one word, which was good, and hung up. The second call was to Imogen Sterling. She said she would be there at 5:30 with a copy of every document. She would also be bringing the Trust General Counsel and 1 staff photographer, both of whom would wait in their car unless I asked otherwise. The third call was to Sheriff Carter Pell, who had been my grandfather's hunting partner for 30 years and who had stood at the casket at the funeral and said almost nothing because he did not need to. I told him I did not need him in any official capacity. I just wanted a witness who knew the family. He said he would come in jeans and a flannel and would park his personal truck at the gate. Then I called Marjorie. My sister Marjorie had lived in Boise for 10 years. She had not been to the mountains since 2015. She had not spoken to our mother since 2018. The reasons for both were related and were not my reasons to tell. She answered on the 4th ring. "Holden," she said. "What happened?" I told her. The will, the voicemail, the folder, the Wednesday porch, the Friday morning. She was quiet for a long count. Then she said, "Of course they did. He gave it to you, and they could not stand it." She stayed on the phone with me for an hour. We did not talk about the easement, or the porch, or the trucks I was expecting at sunrise. We talked about a fishing trip we had taken with our grandfather in 1996 to the South Branch of the Potomac, where Marjorie had caught the only brown trout of the day and would not let any of us forget it for the next 7 years. She told me she was flying in. I told her not to. She told me she was flying in anyway, after, and that she would be there for the cleanup. I told her I loved her. I had not told her that in 2 years. She said it back. I hung up and went to bed at 1:45. Otis arrived Thursday at sundown. He had walked. Otis Riggs had walked everywhere on this mountain for 22 years. He had a rifle in a canvas case slung over his shoulder. The rifle stayed in the case the whole night. The case stayed leaning against the wall by the door. We did not discuss it. I made dinner. He sat at the kitchen table and watched me cook and did not say much. He had a face that had been outside for most of 7 decades. He had hands that had built things and fixed things and pulled things out of mud. After dinner, he asked if he could sleep in the spare room. I said yes. Around 11, when I was making coffee for the morning, he came back into the kitchen. He sat down at the table and folded his hands on the wood. "Your grandfather walked this porch every morning for 42 years, he said. He told me once that the only thing he was scared of dying with was you having to face them alone. I told him I would handle that. So that is what tomorrow is." He looked at the rifle case by the door. He looked back at me. "The gun stays in the bag," he said. "That is for me, not for them. I just do not like leaving it home." He drank half his coffee. He went to bed. I should tell you what I almost did that night, because if I do not, this part of the story sounds cleaner than it was. Around 1 a.m, I picked up my phone, and I came within one button of calling my brother. I had a sentence ready. I was going to tell him that if he turned around now. Before the trucks came up the road, I would not press anything. I would not name the easement. I would not name the life estate. I would let him save face. I am glad I did not call. You do not negotiate with people who are about to bring trucks to your house at sunrise. They have already chosen. The kind thing is not to give them the off-ramp. The kind thing is to let them arrive and meet the wall. If you have ever wondered why the people in stories like this one wait until the morning of, this is the answer. Family Secret Tales is a place for people who learn to let things finish. If a story like that fits the kind of evening you are having, take a second now to subscribe, so the next one finds you. What I had not told anyone yet, including Otis, was that the woman who ran the Conservation Trust had agreed to come at 5:30 and with the easement documents in her hand. The trucks were not the climax of this story. The porch was. Imogen arrived at 5:28. She drove a green Subaru and parked it in the small turnout below the lodge so it would not be visible from the lower switchback. Her general counsel and the photographer stayed in the car. She came up to the porch with a leather folio under her arm, and she sat down in my grandfather's chair without being asked. The way a person sits in a chair when they know the man who used to sit in it would have wanted them to. Sheriff Pell arrived at 5:40 in his personal truck. He was wearing jeans and a red flannel and a Carhartt cap. He had a thermos of coffee. He leaned on the porch railing and looked at the sky. "Going to be a nice morning," he said. Cold. Otis sat in the rocking chair Stanley had built in 1973. He had his hands folded on his lap. The rifle case was still leaning against the wall inside the door, where nobody from outside would see it. I stood. I did not sit. I did not need to. The two black SUVs came up the switchback at 6:40 in the morning, and the self-storage truck was behind them. The lead SUV stopped 20 feet short of the porch. The second one parked sideways across the gravel like it was meant to box me in. The storage truck pulled up and parked with the back doors facing the lodge. 3 men got out of the lead SUV in tactical gear, vests, sidearms holstered. 1 man got out of the second SUV in a polo shirt and khakis with a clipboard. The driver of the storage truck stayed in the cab. Beckett's white Silverado came up the road 30 seconds later. He parked at the back of the line. He got out with a leather portfolio under his arm and a coffee cup in his other hand, and a face that he had practiced in a mirror. He walked toward the porch, and then he saw it. He saw Imogen in the chair first, because she was the unfamiliar face and his eyes went there. Then he saw Otis. Then he saw Sheriff Pell. He stopped. His coffee cup tilted slightly in his hand, and he did not notice it for a second, and then he did. A small dark splash hit the gravel between his boots. He did not look down at it. The lead security man had been counting porch steps with his eyes, the way a man counts steps when he is figuring out how to clear them. He stopped counting. He looked at Sheriff Pell. Then he looked at Beckett. Then he looked back at Pell. "Sir," the security man said, "what jurisdiction are you in this morning?" Sheriff Pell did not look at him. He looked at the ridge. "Son," Pell said, "I am off duty. I am here for coffee with friends. You can do what you came to do, or you cannot. That is between you and the gentleman with the clipboard, and the gentleman who just got out of the white truck." The security man looked at the man with the clipboard. The man with the clipboard looked at Beckett. The man with the clipboard had a brand new pen in his hand and had not written anything on the clipboard yet. Beckett took 2 steps forward. "Holden," he said, "we can fix this in 5 minutes. Just let us inside." Imogen Sterling stood up out of my grandfather's chair. She did not raise her voice. She had read aloud in the conference rooms of small county courthouses for 30 years, and she did not need to raise her voice for anyone. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "my name is Dr. Imogen Sterling, and I am the Executive Director of the Allegheny Highlands Conservation Trust. I am here this morning to read a series of recorded encumbrances on the property your brother now owns. By prior agreement with the previous owner, the trust attends any attempted transition of this property." She opened the folio. She read the easement description first, section and township numbers. Acreage, 2,560 acres. The year, October 18th, 1998. The prohibitions, one at a time. No development. No subdivision. No collateralization. No timber harvest beyond annual cull approved by the trust's forester. She read it in a voice you could have used to read a grocery list. She handed Beckett a copy of the recorded document with the recorder stamp visible at the top. Beckett did not look at it. He held it in his left hand. Imogen turned a page in the folio. Then she read the life estate. She named Otis Riggs. She named the caretaker's cabin. She named the year, 2003. She read the recorded language that said no owner of the property, present or future, retained any right to remove the life tenant from the premises. She handed Beckett a copy. Then she sat back down in my grandfather's chair. The man with the clipboard had stopped breathing for a second. He started again. He looked at Beckett. Beckett did not look back at him. The security men had been standing the whole time at parade rest. The lead one moved his weight from one foot to the other. The other 2 were looking at the gravel. The driver of the storage truck was looking at his phone in his lap through the windshield. Beckett tried his pivot. He had practiced it. You could see him reach for it. "Holden," he said, "we just want to talk." I had been quiet up to that point. I had been quiet through the will reading and the voicemail, and the Wednesday folder, and the night at the kitchen table with Otis. I had been quiet for 14 days. I reached into my coat pocket and took out the brass pin. I held it up between my thumb and forefinger so the 1998 on the cap caught the early light. "Beckett," I said. He took me to all 4 corners. That was the only sentence I said the whole morning. Beckett looked at the pin. Beckett looked at the porch. Beckett looked at the storage truck. He turned around and walked back to his Silverado and got in and did not start it for almost a full minute. The security crew looked at each other and started moving toward the SUVs without being told. The man with the clipboard folded the clipboard against his chest and walked toward his ride. The storage truck driver started his engine. The line of vehicles backed down the gravel drive one at a time. The truck took the longest because the driver had to turn around at the lower switchback, and we could hear it for a full 2 minutes after we could no longer see it. Beckett left last. He did not look at the porch when he drove past it. Otis took a long sip of his coffee. "Well," he said, "that went about how he wanted it to." He did not say who he was. He did not need to. Imogen smiled a small smile at the ridge and did not look at any of us. My mother arrived 20 minutes later in her own car. She must have been waiting at a turnout down the mountain. She must have driven up when she did not see the trucks coming back down. She parked behind Pell's pickup. She got out. My father got out of the passenger seat. She walked up the gravel drive alone. My father stayed at the car for a long second. Then he started walking. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She looked at Imogen. She looked at Otis. She looked at me. She did not look at Sheriff Pell. "Holden," she said, "please come down off that porch and talk to your mother for 1 minute like a grown man." I did not move. She tightened her hand on her purse strap. "He gave it to you because you were always more like him, sweetheart," she said. "I just want you to understand what we are losing here. This was supposed to be Beckett's launch. This was the thing that was finally going to make the family name mean something in this town again. And we will not survive looking small in front of this town. Your grandfather did not understand what he did. He was not himself at the end. You know that. You know. She was crying now. Not loud. Polished, my father came up the gravel drive behind her. He stopped at the bottom of the steps next to her. He took off his cap. He held it against his chest the way he had held it at the funeral. He did not say anything to her. He walked past her. He climbed the porch steps. He stopped at the top, looked at Otis, and put a hand on Otis's shoulder. Then he sat down in the rocking chair next to Otis and put his cap on his knee. My mother stood at the bottom of the steps with her purse strap in her hand and looked up at the porch like she did not recognize anyone on it. She said Wallace twice. He did not answer her. She turned around and walked back to her car. She got in. She drove down the mountain. She drove slow. The taillights stayed visible for a long time through the trees. My father did not get up out of the chair until after Imogen left. Beckett's Developer LLC lost its line of credit in November when the bank found out the personal guarantee had been secured against an anticipated inheritance that was not actually anticipated. He filed Chapter 7 in February. His second wife filed a separation petition in April. By summer, he was back working in management for the hardware store chain my father had sold our family business to in 2011. He sends Christmas cards to my parents that come back marked no longer at this address, because my mother does not live there anymore. My mother sold the house in Lewisburg in March to pay her share of the divorce settlement. She moved to Charleston, to a one-bedroom apartment above her sister's garage. She has not contacted me. I do not expect her to. My father filed for the divorce 8 days after the porch. The papers were quick, because they had been ready for longer than I had realized. He kept the truck, his clothes, his tools, and his half of a small savings account he had opened in 1979 without telling my mother and had been adding to ever since. He moved into the caretaker's cabin guest room as Otis's roommate in late March, with my blessing and Otis's, and he spends most days now fixing fence line, repairing the fire tower's lower railing, and reading. He calls me every Sunday at 4 p.m. We do not always talk for long. We do not need to. Marjorie flew in for a long weekend in October. It was the first time she had been on the mountain in 10 years. I picked her up at the Lewisburg airport on a Thursday afternoon. She came out of the small terminal with one duffel bag and a smaller bag. She had not cut her hair since the last picture I had seen of her. She stopped at the curb when she saw me and put her bag down and put both arms around me and did not let go for almost a minute. She had been crying on the plane. She told me later that she had been crying off and on for about 6 weeks. We drove up the mountain with the windows down. She did not say much on the drive. She looked at the trees and the curves and the small Methodist church at the bottom of the last switchback. She had not seen any of it in 10 years, and she had thought about all of it almost every day. She and I and my father and Otis ate dinner on the porch the first night while the sun went down over the western ridge. My father had cooked. He had not cooked for any of us in maybe 30 years. It was meatloaf and green beans and biscuits, and it was good. He looked smaller at the table than I remembered. He laughed once when Otis told a story about a black bear that had once tried to come into the caretaker's cabin through a kitchen window in 2009. Marjorie did not cry at the table. She just sat in her chair and looked at the mountain like a person looks at a room they used to live in. After dinner, she and I walked out to the fire tower together. We climbed it slow. She was 41 and I was 38, and we used to race up the stairs as kids. We did not race. At the top, she sat down on the wood floor with her legs through the railing the way she had always sat at the top, and she looked west, and she said one sentence. He was waiting for one of us to be ready. I told her about the note, the line that said, "The people who already love it." She thought about it for a while. Then she said, "He always knew. He was just polite about it." She is coming back in the spring for 2 weeks. She is bringing her partner, a woman named Marjorie has been with for 6 years, and whom my mother has never met and never will. The lodge has plenty of room. I got the regional position at the agency in March. They had passed me over twice in 8 years. The salary bump bought me a new transmission for the F-150 and nothing else. I did not move out of the rental in Elkins. I did not buy anything for the lodge. The lodge does not need anything. The new title comes with more meetings and a lot more paperwork, and 1 trip a year to Richmond. And I will trade the meetings for the work I get to do on the ground, which is more elk and more black bear, and more of the land my grandfather spent a lifetime protecting one piece at a time. For the first time in 12 years, I sleep through the night. I wake up before the alarm. I do not check my phone first. That is the part of all this I think about most. Not the porch, not the SUVs. The sleep. On the last morning in May, I drove up to the lodge before sunrise. I parked in the upper turnout. I took a small canvas pack with water and a sandwich and the brass survey pin from the wooden box on the mantel, and I hiked the ridge from the lodge to the first corner of the easement. The pin was still in the ground. The 1998 on the cap was weathered but readable. I knelt and brushed the leaves off it and stood up and walked to the second corner. Second pin. Still there. Third corner. Still there. The fourth corner is the highest point on the property. The fire tower stands 50 yards from it. The sun was just coming up over the eastern ridge when I got there. I knelt at the pin. I pressed my hand flat on the cap the way my grandfather had made me press my hand flat on the cap of mine when I was 12. The metal was cold. The spare was still in my pocket. I stood up. I did not drive the spare into the ground. The 4 corners were already marked. The spare belonged in the box on the mantel where my grandfather had put it. The box belonged on the mantel for whoever came after me, in whatever year that turned out to be. I walked back down the ridge toward the lodge. The porch light was on. Otis was making coffee inside. My father was on the porch in his cap, watching the road, the way my grandfather had watched the road every morning for 42 years. I put the spare pin back in the wooden box. I closed the lid. I went out to the porch. My father slid the second cup of coffee toward me, without saying anything. The sun moved another inch up over the ridge. That was the morning. If a quiet story like this one has ever sat in your pocket, waiting for the right moment, I am glad you stayed for it. Family Secret Tales is where we open the drawers nobody opened for years and let the truth take its own time. Tell me in the comments whether the people in your family kept their paperwork carefully or carelessly, because every story like this one starts with that single fact. Subscribe so the next one finds you on a slow evening when you have the time to hear it all the way through. There will be another one soon. There always is.